Okay, can I hand over to you, Dr. Daly, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Thane. It's, I suppose, I'm this hors d'oeuvre to start you off. And it's always a slight problem because so this is a meeting where everyone's generally interested in the liver, and you're here wondering what on earth is a bone specialist talking to you about. You've got one disease, you don't want another. But I think the interesting thing is that how medicine is developing is that some of the older diseases that we knew about, liver disease and so on, and indeed other diseases, we're now getting to grips with. We can actually treat extremely well. And the organs, the bits of the body that are now being targeted are those parts of the body which are either affected by the original disease or affected by the treatment of that disease. And this, of course, is very important if we think of corticosteroids and bone. And I suppose that we're sort of getting down to the weakest link theory, that you get over your liver disease and then the next weakest link is your bone and so on. We also have to remember that people are for living a great deal longer. And I think the other thing about the bone disease in primary biliary cirrhosis has been that there has been a change in the type of bone disease. The best part of 25 years ago, when I was first taking a fairly active interest in this when I was working at Cambridge, we saw quite a lot of types quite a lot of bone disease of a particular type, which we hardly ever see now. And I guess that one of the things we've done has been quite effective in actually treating that. So let us just have a look at one or two overheads, and you will have to shout loudly if you can't see them or they're too dark or The traditional type of bone disease in primary biliary was a disease called osteomalacia, which is now fairly rarely seen. It's a disease where the bone, you have a fairly good amount of bone, but the bone that you have is undermineralized, and there are very good reasons for this. More recently, we're seeing a great deal of osteoporosis, and I hesitate to say that this is the same type of osteoporosis as you see in the postmenopausal woman, the type of osteoporosis that leads to hip fractures. The end result may be the same, but the mechanism by which we actually reach that stage may be very different. There are quite a number of causes of osteoporosis and osteomalacia, many of which have now been worked out. The common cause in the past was that of vitamin D depletion, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next overhead. Problem of calcium deficiency was also very important, a poor calcium intake in the diet and a poor absorption of calcium from the gut. More recently, the use of corticosteroid drugs, prednisone and other drugs like that, have led to a type of bone disease that we see with corticosteroids, which leads to thinning of the bone and to subsequent fractures. And finally, there's been some quite interesting work so in recent times on the role of bilirubin, which one of the things you all know about, I'm sure, as a particular agent which antagonizes the action of the osteoblast. The osteoblast is the cell that builds the bone. There are basically two cells in bone. There's the blast that builds, and there's the clast that crunches. And they're in mutual harmony. And the bilirubin is not too healthy a thing for the osteoblast. And then I put transplantation in brackets because that brings along a whole further load of bone problems. And if we look at the problems, to those of you who've got who are into sort of Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel will recognise that I haven't quite got everything together yet. I'm learning. But I think the slide sort of says it all in rather an amateurish way. The first thing is vitamin D. So vitamin D is very important for a number of reasons. It increases the absorption of calcium from the gut, and it also aids the laying down of properly mineralized bone. And if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're in dead trouble. And the vitamin D comes from two sources. It comes from the action of sunlight on the skin, where its precursor is formed into vitamin D by the action of ultraviolet light. Hence, people who live in sunny climes have higher levels of vitamin D. And in this country, we see the vitamin D levels alter between summer and winter. The vitamin D is then taken to the liver, where it's converted to the next step. And one of the further things that happens is that some of the vitamin D is normally excreted in the bile and is then reabsorbed. And this step is partially blocked in diseases where there's obstruction to the outflow of bile. And of course, primary biliary is an outstanding sort of example of this. But then you can also take in vitamin D from the diet. There are quite a number of foodstuffs now which actually have vitamin D added to them. And the vitamin D is taken into the stomach, and then it's then absorbed. It goes from the stomach down into his small intestine, is absorbed to the liver. And here again, it's been shown so many years ago, actually, that vitamin D is badly absorbed from the gut, and so indeed is calcium. So there's a double whammy, if you like. You have both a malabsorption of calcium and of vitamin D in conditions where there is obstruction of the outflow of bile. And this, of course, is one of the reasons why we emphasize that you must take an awful lot of calcium. Just to show you the sort of levels of vitamin D, just to give you a handle on the sort of levels, and I also show you this because this is some of the work I did many years ago, that so in normal people, the average level of the circulating metabolite of vitamin D comes out at 26, and in primary biliary cirrhosis it's 13, it's halved. So the actual levels are so extremely low and can be virtually undetectable. What does this mean? Well, we've had quite a number of patients with primary biliary cirrhosis who've come our way through the kindness of Graham Kerr. Probably many of you who live in this area know him well. And we've been trying to cope with the osteoporosis side. And what I'm showing you here is the bone mineral density, the thickness of the bone. Now, there are those of you who may not be very au fait with bone mineral density measurements. What essentially you do is lie on a table, and there's a form of scanner that goes backwards and forwards over you, and essentially all that happens is a small amount of X-rays is passed through your body, a very small amount, about 1/10 of a chest X-ray. And the more bone you have in the way of the X-ray, the fewer X-rays hit the detector above your body, and the more bone that you have. It's extremely simple. The only thing is it's a bit expensive. And you can get some data for for healthy, normal people. This is healthy, normal women. I sort of show women because women are largely affected. And this is the average. You can see that bone density in the average woman falls after about the late 40s, certainly in the spine till the early 70s, and in the hip probably to a great deal later. And this is the average. And these two lines here so indicate where 95% of the population lie. And you can see that these red dots are usually below the average. And whereas it may not be too bad if you're down here at this age, it's rather important if you're down here at that age, because you're going to lose more bone, and you will gradually go down like that until you fall below a very important line here, which the World Health Organization has So, is there any other way that we can try and identify whether somebody is at risk? Well, I'm not going to say a great deal about this because this all becomes very technical, but essentially these are blood tests, the bone markers that I've got up here, both blood and urine. And these are extremely interested in primary biliary cirrhosis, and I've got one or two scientists in my department who are working on this at the moment, trying to identify people who have an indication that the bone is being broken down at an accelerated rate, and we can do this by means of tests in both blood and urine, as I say. And that looks as though it's going to be extremely interesting. But enough of that, because you want to know how you can actually be prevented from actually sort of getting this this bone problem. Well, we can certainly give sort of vitamin D, and because of the problems in the gut, an awful lot of us give the vitamin D by intramuscular injection. There are various other ways in which it can be given, and there are various more active forms of vitamin D which are rather better absorbed, which we can also use if indicated. But intramuscular vitamin D given at regular, though not frequent intervals, is, I think, a very important form of treatment in this condition. Obviously, if you can get sunlight, that's also very helpful. But in these climes, that's not easily done, and you can't get your holiday to the Balearics paid for on the NHS yet. Calcium supplements are very important, and it's difficult to know quite what to say here, partially because my view on calcium supplements is very much at odds with the view put out by the National Osteoporosis Society. I think we all agree that calcium supplements are very important. It's how you actually take them which is the important thing. There's a lot of emphasis on taking milk, a lot of calcium in milk, a lot of calcium in cheese. There's a lot of protein in both, of course. But there's not a lot of calcium in anything else, in spite of what you read. You'll read that broccoli and spinach and all sorts of unpleasant things have calcium, but really you don't have to to eat these things. In practical terms, the only foods which have got a decent amount of calcium in are milk, cheese, yogurt, and tuna fish if you eat the actual bones as well. So these are the options. And I'm talking about eating substantial amounts of calcium. I'm talking about eating about 1.5 grams of calcium a day, which is an awful lot. And there have been some good studies recently which show that the more calcium you eat, the more calories you eat, so the fatter you get, which of course is also important. Well, of course, you can overcome all these problems very easily by taking calcium tablets. And calcium tablets, in my view, are the answer to an awful lot of problems because they are cheap and they're very effective. They do cause a bit of indigestion in some people, but there are an awful lot of types of calcium tablet. And if you don't do well on one, you may well do well on some other type of formulation. So I go for calcium supplements every time, and I ignore milk and all these sort of things. But that is not the view which is promulgated by the National Osteoporosis Society. There are cynics like myself who think that they get so much money from the Milk Marketing Board that they don't say anything else. But that would be a cynical observation. Then we have to think of HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And I think this is one of the biggest questions I get asked. Is HRT safe in liver disease? And I think that we're asked this partly because we have enormous HRT clinics, so people think that we know the answer, and we also have got a little bit of experience now. And we've been treating people with low-dose estrogen to prevent bone loss. We've been treating women, I should say, with low-dose estrogen to prevent bone loss, and it works very well. And one of the things we've found quite recently is that the amount of estrogen that is necessary to prevent bone loss seems to be considerably less than the amount of estrogen needed to prevent things like hot flushes and the common menopausal symptoms. And we've been using much lower doses of estrogen with considerable success and far fewer side effects. And we haven't really found any change in the values of the various liver function tests. And I'll come back to this one in a moment, but just let me show you the results of, this is one of the liver enzymes, ALT, in a lady who's now been on it for about 18 months. And this is on low-dose estrogen patch, Estroderms 25, and you can see that the ALT hasn't really changed over the time that she's had HRT. We've got a fair number like this now, and I'm not particularly upset by HRT, I have to say, in liver disease, but it will be interesting to hear other views, perhaps. And finally, there are the drugs known as the bisphosphonate group of drugs. These are the drugs such as Didronol and drugs such as Fosamax. And they're extremely effective at preventing bone loss in postmenopausal women. They're much more effective, interestingly, in older women rather than so younger women. We've been using them in liver disease, including primary biliary, and one of the problems seems to be they aren't very well absorbed. They aren't very well absorbed at the best of times. A drug called Fosamax, many of you may have heard about, is only 0.7% absorbed in the gut, or thereabouts. And in the presence of primary biliary and other causes of malabsorption, even less well absorbed. And I think the answer here, well, the answer we've come up with in people who can't take HRT is that we give the stuff intravenously, and this works extremely well. So I think that there are methods now of overcoming the bone disease that we see with primary biliary, and I should say the bone disease associated with corticosteroids, which has not been taken at all seriously and which can lead to devastating consequences. So I think we have the tools now to actually treat the disease. We have the tools to find out if you've got the disease, and all we need now is the action to put these two aspects into the world as a whole. So on that note, I think that's all I've got to say. You're having a few questions later on after Dr. Nordberger. Righto. Thank you very much.